Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
You are listening to the Seattle Shrimp Tank, streaming to you on Facebook, and you can catch us every other week on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio here on Facebook until we resume broadcasting in our physical studio. I'm Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-host, Dan Whedon. You can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and through iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes so you never miss an episode. And if you are subscribed, please rate our podcast. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Our guest for today's podcast is Gary Tashjian, founder of Darwin's Natural Pet Products. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Brad. Nice to be here.
Awesome. Dan, hello.
Hello, Brad. How are you? Gary, I guess just kind of forgot I was here, but he knows I'm here as well. But
yes.
So welcome, Gary. We're going to chat with you in just a second. How you doing, Brad? You know this is episode 99 of the Shrimp Tank for us.
99. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one is going to be our very special 100th episode.
So look back. Yep.
100th episode look back. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But I have something else that I wanted to share with you. I'm sure you're shocked about that.
I am. And I just want to make a comment. There aren't a whole lot of shows that have 100 episodes.
No. And I keep thinking of Frasier. Remember the Frasier's 100th episode? We'll have to be better than that.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
listen, the thing I want to talk about is funny because of who our guest is today. I have right next to me, you probably can't hear him snoring, but Captain Jack is sitting here on the chair next to me snoring. And you have Zeus.
I have Zeus. Zeus
right
is sitting
behind
right behind
you.
me. Yes.
And today I had a business meeting with an insurance company representative who said, "Excuse me, I have to walk away. I have to let my cat out because I have no cat litter in here, and I know what he needs to do." So it's so odd that in just less than a year, in this year, the kind of the laying back and saying, okay, we're going to not be as stiff and professional as sometimes we may have a dog or a cat jump on us, or a kid come rushing through trying to get help with their homework, or people like us wearing nice dress shirts with golf shorts underneath. I mean, it's amazing in just a short time, Brad.
Well, at least you're wearing shorts.
I am. I am. Ooh, everybody's now feeling much better. But isn't it odd? I mean, isn't it kind of? I just think it's something to kind of pause as we get towards the end of 2020 about how this has changed us as business professionals.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is necessarily going to change. In fact, I think it's kind of the dawning of the next era of business relationships. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally. It's kind of interesting because, of course, from the time that Zeus was a puppy, and he's now 7 years old, he would come to the office with me, there was a time in my business career that I would have never imagined, right, having a pet at the office. But one of the things that, and I don't know how it is around the rest of the country, but the Pacific Northwest is pretty laid back. Even though I have a full wardrobe, full of suits, very nice dress shirts, ties, and whatnot, and I can dress to the nines. There's no doubt about that. But I also go to church in my jeans or in my Nike sweatpants, because that's just kind of the way that we roll here. And I think that it is becoming a little bit more mainstream. The thing that I noticed about taking Zeus to the office is then people will start to ask, "Where's Zeus? How's Zeus doing?" Et cetera. So I mean, he kind of became somewhat of a bit of a mascot. And I will share with you, it didn't hurt business, and nobody said, "I'm not doing business with you because you have a dog."
Well, you know who does business with our guest because of dogs and cats and all. Gary Tashjian is our guest today. I'll just share that Gary is I've been working with Gary as a client. He's my client for about the last year plus, and I have gotten to know Gary well and really, really respect him as an entrepreneur, as kind of a visionary towards what we're going to talk about where it comes to raw dog food, raw pet food as a product. And he's selling his food all over the country. We're going to talk a lot about that. Why don't you let everybody know a little bit more about Gary Tashjian?
You bet. So Gary founded Darwin's Natural Pet Products in 2004 to help pets and their owners enjoy more years of healthy companionship together. Darwin's mission is deeply personal. Gary discovered the power of natural, raw pet food when he made the switch for his best friend, Max, an Old English Sheepdog who is suffering from crippling arthritis. After crafting and serving him a blend of fresh meat and vegetables recommended by his holistic veterinarian, Gary watched Max transform from an elderly dog with restricted movement back into his old self, full of energy. In just a month, Max's arthritis all but disappeared. Gary saw the opportunity to help more pets live longer lives by providing them with a healthier diet and making it convenient and affordable for pet owners by delivering meals to their homes. So he quit his job and founded Darwin's. Since then, Darwin's has served more than 50 million nutritious meals to dogs and cats, helping tens of thousands of pets live longer, healthier lives. Gary, welcome to the Seattle Shrimp Tank.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So Gary, I was fascinated when I first met you about how you got started, because it was almost kind of like a garage band type thing in the beginning when how you came up with this and got started. Would you share with everybody the genesis and origins of Darwin's?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's I don't know, back to the future. Here I am. I started it in my home. Here I am back in my home again. But back then I started in what is now a closet off my bedroom. Was our first world headquarters, and started from there. Was manufacturing it in a co-manufacturing facility with somebody else. Did that for quite a few years. Eventually, during the course of that, I met a woman who's now my bride, and she told me that the closet was going to be hers. So I had to move downstairs to my basement, which doubled my commute. Did that for the first few years, and then finally graduated into our own facility.
So I have a question, really kind of on that transition, the graduation from home and then into the facility that you have, which, you have about 100 people working in that facility, I believe. Talk about a little bit of that, how that transition evolved and some of the steps from an entrepreneur standpoint that you had to take as the founder and CEO.
There were actually a couple of intermediate steps between operating out of the house and where we are now. We've been in this place for the last 5 years or so, but before that, we rented a couple of spaces just in business parks, renting a one bay facility there. And again, kind of co-producing with another company that made a similar product. One of the things I tried to do when we started out was keep my overhead low. I mean, that was one of the keys, I think, to our survival and success was managing our overhead effectively, and that was a way to do that. So I tried to wherever we could avoid having to make big investments until we were able to support them.
So Gary, this is really interesting, and I'm so glad that you're here because the pet industry. I mean, Americans just absolutely love our pets. They're part of our family. We're a culture that isn't like every culture in the world. I know this because I have extended family members that have married into the family who are from different cultures where pets are not members of the family.
Yeah.
They have a different role. But I know it's a huge industry. We would do anything for our pets. I just had a major vet bill for mine, and you just don't even question whether or not you're going to have them taken care of. But the question that I have is, I really had never heard, right, of this concept for many years until I started seeing some advertising on the internet, on TV, through some of the radio programs that I listen to. But this is clearly a thing. But I'm thinking that for you, back in 2004, this was really not. Was it novel? I mean, was it Did you find that you were kind of the only game in town?
Well, literally, yeah, we were. Well, there were a couple of other folks that were doing it in a different way, but in terms of delivering it to people's homes, yeah, we were the only game in town there. It was pretty unusual. I think it's become much more mainstream. We used to back when we started out, we would go to the Seattle Kennel Club Dog Show, which they hold annually, and had a booth there. And people would come up to us, and when we tell them we were selling raw dog food, we just got the most incredulous looks from people, like it was something from from science fiction or something. Now, when we say that, yeah, everybody knows about raw dog food, and so it has become much more mainstream.
Well, you know what, Gary, for those people who might not know about raw dog food, talk a little bit about the science of it, because, I think people fed dogs real food for millennia until about the early 70s, when processed foods for humans and dogs and cats all kind of became the same, and everybody started getting sick and unhealthy from them. Talk about raw dog food, the science, and we'll talk about dogs, their stomachs and what they're allowed to handle.
Okay. We have an expression that we use for ourselves. We say we're inspired by nature and informed by science. So what the basis for the diet is what we would say is the dog's, what they call ancestral diet, which is basically what a wolf eats, because a wolf is the ancestor of a dog, and basically they still have the same digestive tract and anatomy. So we start by trying to mimic that diet, which is primarily meat, fresh meat, but also with some vegetables as well. That's what a wolf would typically consume. Where the science comes in is making sure that it's complete and balanced, that it has all the nutrients that current scientific knowledge has to offer, to make sure that the pet is getting everything that they need. And that changes. While the ancestral diet is pretty stable, science has made advancements just in the 15 years that we've been in business, and so that's constantly, if you'll pardon the expression, evolving. Mm-hmm. The science part of it is evolving, but we try and make the best of both of those principles, where nature and science intersect, and hence the name Darwin's is because that's we take our inspiration from Darwin's approach to understanding nature through science.
So I'm not going to plug any of these other companies by saying their name, but I am going to ask what's the differentiator, right? So I see some organization advertised on Sirius XM satellite radio or on cable TV. What's different about your guys' approach to any of your competitors?
Without knowing who you're speaking of, obviously there's a huge difference between us and kibble. Anybody that makes
but so
kibble.
Like the farmer's dog.
Yeah, there are others now doing what I'll call fresh food.
Okay.
As opposed to processed food. And the difference there is, again, we are raw and theirs is cooked.
Cooked. Okay. And so that's an important distinction.
Yeah. And I'm there's nothing wrong per se with cooked food. I mean, I think those companies are a huge improvement over processed kibble. it almost becomes a philosophic difference that, again, we think that there are a lot of micronutrients in foods that are destroyed by heat. And we're constantly learning more about them, but we think that, you know, we basically start with the premise that the less we do to our pets' food, as well as ours, the better it is for them. I kind of say we grew up in, or I grew up, I got a little bit more gray hair than you guys, in what I call the Wonder Bread era, where we thought that science could improve upon food. Now we understand basically that food is inherently nutritious, and the less we do to it, the more we make those inherent nutrients available to our pets, the better it is for them. And in the case of our pets, you know, cooking just isn't necessary. So we think that you know, raw is the way to go to make sure that they're getting all of those nutrients that might not be available in a cooked product.
So somebody who is not familiar with you, and hopefully they're becoming more familiar, would ask, okay, so you've got uncooked raw dog food, and then you're delivering it to us. What happens from the point that you've put this together and got it to us? How do you keep it from going bad?
You mean in transit, or once it reaches?
Well, no, I guess what I was asking, that was a terrible way of asking. Talk about your manufacturing process, how you put it all together, you package it, and then you get it out.
Yeah, it's a very you know, it's a straightforward process. We typically get the food, and in many cases it is frozen, so we defrost it, then basically grind it, mix it, and refreeze it. So with you know, the manufacturing process takes, you know, minutes, and then it takes a day or two to completely refreeze, and then it's ready to be shipped to our customers. So we like to say that the time from farm to food bowl is a matter of weeks. You know, it's, you know, whereas again with processed kibble, it could be months that between you know, when you look at all the steps of the supply chain, you know, it could be months from farm to food bowl. Whereas in our case, because it's a one stop, we source directly from the farms and we deliver directly to our customers. So it's as short a supply chain as you can possibly get, making sure that the ingredients are as fresh as possible.
Well, you know what else is fresh? What's fresh is our first commercial. And we're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, Gary Tashjian, founder of Darwin's Natural Pet Products, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to find out if he thinks the food is hot or not. I'll explain when we come back. So don't walk away. We'll be right back with more from the Seattle Shrimp Tank.
The Seattle Shrimp Tank is brought to you by IdealLife360.com. What would it be like to be in the best shape of your life, both physically and mentally, every day for the rest of your life? Have awesome relationships with people you care most about. Never having to worry about money again. What would it be like if you received a letter out of the blue and suddenly discovered you had 20 more years to live than you ever imagined? What would you do with those extra years of your life? How many lives could you touch? What kind of legacy could you leave behind? What changes would you make today knowing you had 20 more years in your future? What new big challenges would you take on? What would be next? Text the word IDEAL to 89800 and discover how to rethink, redefine, and invent the best years of your life.
Welcome back to the Seattle Shrimp Tank from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in Seattle and the greater Puget Sound area. I'm Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-host, Dan Whedon. And remember, you can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or catch us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And might I say, also, if you're a Comcast or Xfinity subscriber, you can just hit your remote and talk into it and say Seattle Shrimp Tank. That's my little plug there. For our next segment, Hot or Not.
And Hot or Not is sponsored by Shrimp Peeler sponsors West Sound Workforce, Port Ludlow Resort, Kitsap Economic Development Alliance, SJ Graphics, and the Kitsap Sun newspaper. Gary, this is where Brad and I pepper you with some questions about business, about life, and you're going to tell us whether you think it's hot or not and why, and at the end you win absolutely nothing. So, hot or not, Gary, cooking your own food for your pets?
You know, I think it's fine. I started off doing that myself, so it can certainly be done. You know, one of the folks I admire, Dr. Karen Becker, has an expression that she says some of the best fed pets are fed a homemade diet, and some of the worst fed pets are fed a homemade diet. So it really depends on the care that you take in preparing your food. When I decided to start the company, I had been making my own dog's food for a couple of years, at least 2 or 3 years probably. I didn't realize until I really studied the science and started formulating our own pets' meals, what a poor job I was doing of formulating it on my own. Because, you know, you have a recipe and then one day you don't have this ingredient, so you do it without that. And one day you don't have another ingredient, so you do it without that. And eventually you wind up with a diet that's potentially, you know, not complete and not balanced. I've had people come up to me and very proudly say, "Oh, I make my dog's food," you know, and I ask them, "Well, what are you feeding?" And they say, "Well, you know, ground beef and rice." And I'm like, you know, "What about the phosphorus? What about the calcium? What about, you know, it's not as easy as you think." So and anybody who wants to do it, I'd encourage that, but you really have to, you know, pay attention to your recipe, not just get some recipe off the internet and do it, but you know, take care to do it. And it's not easy. So that's why we're here.
Well, it kind of steals my hot or not question here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Raw eggs.
It's fine. Very nutritious for a pet. Not I wouldn't recommend it for a person.
not for a human.
Unless you're Rocky Balboa, right?
Yeah.
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 No,
So
not even for Rocky.
Not even for.
Oh yeah, if you're a fictional person, yes. Then
well, I guess the follow-up that I wanted to make with regard to that is, you know, obviously you call that an ancestral diet for, you know, for animals, and animals are, you know, while we would like to think they're human, they are not. I mean, humans cannot eat raw food. There's all sorts of issues associated with that. But, you know, I know that among the reasons that people talk about, you know, the pros and cons of various diets is the expense, right? Because dried kibble is cheap. Let's face it, it's not particularly expensive, and you know, feeding this kind of diet. So what tips or tricks do you have for individuals that, you know, is there an in between? Is it either, you know, it's all or nothing, or is it hey, even if you fed them one meal a day this way, could you go into a little bit of that?
I think there is an in between. I mean,
Yeah.
Obviously, the more you feed of healthy whole foods, the better. But if for some reason you can't do that, then I think, you know, one meal a day or half of a meal is certainly better than none. I mean, you don't have to be a purist. You just do the best you can.
Sure.
You know, under the circumstances. You know, but I think you also have to think through when you look at the cost of this, because yeah, these ingredients are more expensive. I mean, when I think about, you know, if you get a 40-pound bag of dog food for $40, let's say, that's $1 a pound. Well, you know, when you look at everybody's, you know, the distributor's making a profit, the manufacturer's making a profit, the retailer's making a profit, those ingredients are probably about 25 cents a pound. What do you think you're getting for 25 cents a pound? I mean, you just, you know, you can't have good quality ingredients. So you're definitely going to pay more. But the way I justify it in terms of cost is you're going to save most or all of it in vet bills. You know, because my dogs typically, they'll go for a checkup, but that's about it, and they don't have health problems, you know, because they're on good diets. But more importantly, you know, what are 2 or 3 or 4 more years of quality life with your pet worth to you?
Yeah.
That's what it really comes down to. You know, the story we had of Max, you know, he was 10 years old when I started him on making his food for him, and he lived to be 15. And I have big dogs. You know, now we have golden retrievers. Then I had Old English Sheepdogs. They typically live to be 15. Whereas, you know, on kibble, you know, you'd be lucky to get them to be 10 years old. So, and how can you put a value on, and not only do they live longer, but those years are healthier. You know, they're happy, they're active, they can do things with you. How do you put a price on that?
So other than reading the ingredients on the bag, what's in kibble?
Well, there are a lot of different kibbles too.
Sure.
I mean, you know, you can't. You know, there are some of them that are $20 for that $40 bag, and you know, I shudder to think what's in them.
Yeah, sawdust.
I don't want to badmouth. I mean, there are some good quality kibbles, but you know, that use good ingredients. You know, it's all across the park. I mean, you know, the big difference is that typically they will use grains or some sort of a carbohydrate to reduce the cost and provide a, you know, cheap source of nutrition. Our food doesn't use any at all. I mean, they use vegetables, you know, which are carbohydrates, I guess, but no grains or fillers like that.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference.
So Gary, you are a direct to consumer company, B2C as it were. How do people find you from an entrepreneurial marketing type of perspective? What is your marketing strategy? How do people who are pet owners find you?
Yeah. Word of mouth is a lot of it, and also, but just searching for, you know, we get a lot of our customers from, you know, paid search or just Google search. People searching raw dog food find us that way.
That's got to have over the 15 years, as we know how much digital has changed and technology, that's really probably had to become a very integral part of your whole marketing strategy from an executive level. Can you talk about how that's changed, let's say, over the course of this past decade?
Yeah, when we started out, we were a local company. We just sold and delivered in the greater Seattle area, and then we would use almost exclusively word of mouth, primarily from holistic vets, and then from our customers. And then we would also do various events like street fairs, dog shows, things like that. We couldn't scale that. You know, that was fine when we were operating locally, but when we decided to move to a national presence, we couldn't do that anymore. And so we started utilizing paid search. And we've just refined that to the point, although we would like to reduce our dependence on paid search. You know, it's gotten expensive. Everybody else is doing it too now.
Right.
So we've evolved from relying on that to generating a lot of using content marketing is what I think folks would call it. Generating content that people would, when they search, they find that content, and then they find us that way. So we're still they're still finding us through a search engine, but not through paid search advertising. We're trying to migrate more and more to that model.
So I know, Gary, that we've talked a lot about dogs, and so we've got 3 sane people on our program today. But what about the part of that population who have cats?
Yeah. We started out being unabashedly dog centric. We only had dog food, and we started getting calls from our customers saying, my cat keeps stealing my dog's food. Can you do something about that? So we launched a cat food line primarily for our dog customers who had cats, not intending to go after the cat market at all, but as an accommodation, so that we wouldn't have any dog versus cat fights over the food bowl.
Oh,
Because
come on.
the meals are different. Yeah, we know who would win. But, well, I'm not sure. Actually, I've
No, maybe not.
pretty feisty cats. They are a little bit different. Whereas dogs are a mix of meat and vegetables. Cats typically should be eating 100% meat. They are carnivores, whereas dogs are omnivores. So the proper diet for a cat is different than a dog's diet.
Mm-hmm.
So now cats are a significant portion of our customer base. They're not, we're still primarily a dog food company, but we have a lot of cat customers now.
Before we dive into the next commercial, because of your ability, as you just talked about, to expand your marketing, you ship all over the country. Talk about how you've expanded your ability to do that. You've got a couple different distribution centers around. Can you talk a little bit about how that's helped you?
Yeah, we started out without a distribution center, and we quickly found that there is no amount of dry ice you can put into a box in Seattle in the middle of the summer and have it get to Miami in good shape. It seems self-evident now, but we had to figure that out. So we opened up an East Coast distribution center, or we contract with the company. They call them 3PLs, third-party logistics providers. And so we have one on the East Coast, and we have another one on the West Coast now that we split it up, and that it just makes things a lot more convenient. It takes a bit of coordination, but it makes the logistics a lot easier.
So what's it? And I know let me just ask this real quick before we go to commercial. So what is the maximum transit time, right? Because obviously that's based on that 2 days. So by having a distribution center in Seattle and having a distribution Seattle in Miami, right? You can get anywhere in the country in 2 days.
Yes. Yeah. If for some reason we can't do it by ground, we'll do it by air. But
Okay.
we a couple of years ago, we just put a stake in the ground and said we're going to get everything wherever it needs to go. We're going to get there in 2 days.
Okay.
Well, we're going to put a stake in the ground and get to our next commercial in about 2 seconds. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back with Gary Tashjian, CEO and founder of Darwin's Natural Pet Products, for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to find out what his dogs really think. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Seattle Shrimp Tank.
The Seattle Shrimp Tank is brought to you by our studio sponsor, Whedon Unleashed. As a business owner, you don't have a professional life and a personal life. You have a life. And that life is full of both opportunities and obstacles. Your business is the vehicle to fuel your life. If you run out of fuel because of a crisis, then your entire lifestyle is affected. Dan Whedon works with small and medium-sized business owners to assure that no calamity is fatal. Dan focuses on accelerating business growth while at the same time planning and implementing strategies on preventing, mitigating, and recovering from those obstacles of business and life. Through his consulting work and his partnership with First Underwriters Insurance to finance your risk, he will make sure that you can confidently unleash the value of your business and lifestyle. To get a complimentary review of your situation, call Dan at 360-271-1592 or email him at dan@danwhedon.com. Tell Dan that you heard him on the Shrimp Tank podcast and receive a 20% discount on any work that is agreed to. Be unleashed and be well.
Welcome back to the Seattle Shrimp Tank from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in Seattle and the greater Puget Sound area. I'm Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-host, Dan Whedon. You can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite streaming device, whether it's iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. For our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
And Plead the Fifth is sponsored by West Sound Workforce, Port Ludlow Resort, Kitsap Economic Development Alliance, SJ Graphics, and the Kitsap Sun. Gary, just like before, we're gonna turn up the heat though on our questions. Just like before, we're gonna pepper you with questions. You are allowed to plead the fifth, but you can only plead the fifth once. So if you plead the fifth early, Brad and I may change our questions a little bit. We don't know. So you have two. Well, I guess that's another story. You have 3 dogs currently. You have Molly, Macy, and you're fostering a new dog. But Molly and Macy know you best. So my question is this: were we to have Molly and Macy on this podcast and they were actually able to speak, what would they say about you on this show?
They're pretty fond of me.
What would they say?
I get some pretty adoring looks from them. So I'm pretty confident they have good things to say about me.
They would. They'd say that you're the guy.
He takes us to work. He feeds us. You know, we share a bed together. That's the way we roll around here. They've got a pretty good life.
Brad, before this, I think this is kind of an important one. Gary and I were just talking about a week and a half ago. Gary fosters and you might explain it a little bit better, fosters dogs, and Darwin's has been active in trying to promote that. Can you give just a little plug for the whole foster care for dogs that goes on in the area?
For me.
Yeah.
Happy to do that. Yeah. That's dogs have been a wonderful thing for me, both personally and professionally. I feel like we ought to give something back to them somehow. And there are so many wonderful dogs that are in shelters. Frankly, less today than there were a year ago. I mean, because that's one of the nice things, the nice side effects of the pandemic is that people have emptied the shelters because they're staying at home and they're adopting more. But we want to be a force for giving as many dogs as possible a good life, so that there's a home for every, basically ending pet homelessness. And we had a program a while ago where the company would foster dogs. We'd go to the shelters. Oh, there you go. And we asked for the dogs that have been there the longest, that were just not getting adopted, that were going a little bit stir crazy because they'd been in the shelter so long. And we would take one of those and foster them at work. They become kind of the company mascots, if you will. And the idea was, brilliant marketing idea. We were going to foster them, rehabilitate them, get them healthy, and then place them with one of our customers, who would then buy more food from us. Well, we placed about 20 dogs that way. 16 of them we placed with employees who get free food from us. By the time they were rehabilitated, somebody had fallen in love with it and adopted them. So from that perspective, from a marketing perspective, it was a miserable failure. But we were thrilled that we placed all those found homes for all those dogs, and those dogs come to the office now. So and I've always looked for rescues myself. I mean, there are just so many good dogs out there looking for homes. So we first got Molly from the there's an organization, for those of you who are in the Seattle area, called the Seattle Purebred Dog Rescue, which, as its name implies, is a coalition of all the various breed clubs in the Seattle area of their rescue arms. And so we first got Molly that way, and then my wife saw a posting from them for our second dog, Macy, who was about 90 pounds when we got her, could barely walk. We put her on a good diet and also treated some underlying medical conditions, and she's lost 30 pounds, and she's just turned into a whole different dog. And we're just thrilled with her. So we just got another dog. She came with the name Buddy. We're not too crazy about that for a girl, so we're trying to figure that one out. But she's 100 pounds, a golden retriever that's 100 pounds. Just really has to take some weight off. We've only had her for a couple of weeks, but she's already showing some signs of kind of coming to life. So we're pretty excited about that.
All right. So for my plead the fifth, Gary, I'm not going to waste it on cats versus dogs. So I'm going to ask it on the best dog breed.
Wow, this is, for those of you who are
This is
listening on
serious.
radio, that's a long pause right there. There's a lot of dead air right there as Gary's taking three deep breaths.
We're still transmitting. So
I gotta say, these golden retrievers, I love all the Old English Sheepdogs I've had have been just wonderful dogs. And I've had a couple of mixes. I have a Rottie German Shepherd mix, Sheba, who was just a wonderful, smartest dog I've ever seen. So I mean, there's something, and my wife came with 2 pugs, and I even
the pugs are awesome.
I even learned to love them. So there's something to be said for all breeds, but these golden retrievers we got right now, they're just wonderful. I mean,
Well, you guys saw Zeus. Zeus is a lab,
yeah,
right? Kissing cousin.
Yep.
Of the Goldens.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for all of them, but
Well, Captain Jack, who you can see now behind me, will be sending a note to you, and you can do with it as you'd like.
It actually looks like you have.
I know
his
my
body.
head. This just didn't quite work out that well. I got to keep turning to the side here. Those of you who'll actually watch the video. I have a question for you, just a little bit of a switch from what you're doing. If you had the ability to go back and give your 21-year-old self a letter or some advice or something, what would you tell 21-year-old Gary?
Well, I'll plead the fifth on that one because.
Wow.
Well, I mean, from a business perspective,
or from a life, business or life, if you had a chance to say to 21-year-old Gary, let me give you some advice, kid, what would it be, knowing what you know now?
That's a tough one.
I told you they were going to be tough.
It's the title of a book that I subsequently read. Do what you love, the money will follow. From a career perspective, that's the advice I'd give.
Okay, very good.
So I do have a question, and I want to make sure that we get to, because Dan, you kind of started going down this road, and we had an amazing conversation. But as the consumer, what should I expect? So Dan talked about, packaging and all that sort of stuff. So, if somebody were truly interested in going down this road, kind of how do they get started? How does the food come? What precautions do they need to take? I know people are always telling me if I've got raw food anywhere around, be careful of salmonella and, wash all this stuff off and, make sure you're not touching it, et cetera. So if the concept of raw food makes anybody a little squirmy, can you address that?
Yeah. First of all, don't worry about your pet. Your pet's going to be fine.
Sure.
We kind of alluded to this earlier, that a pet's digestive system is very much different from ours. Briefly, it's got a lower pH, so it's more acidic. Basically it's a hostile environment. for things like salmonella. They deal with them just fine. Certainly in the trace amounts that are going to be in our USDA inspected meats like ours. So don't worry about the pet. Now, if you have a pet that has a compromised immune system or something like that, that's different. But for 99% of dogs and cats, it's not an issue. For people, it absolutely is an issue. And I just say use the same care and caution you use with poultry that you cook for yourself. Yes, clean your countertop. Do those kind of things to practice safe hygiene. To get back to your earlier point of okay, so how do you start with this thing? Come to our website, Darwin's with an S, darwinspet.com, and we'll take you through what it takes to start off. We typically we start folks off with an introductory offer of 10 pounds for $14.95. Really good price, just to let you see what it's going to be like and start your pet on it and make sure you're comfortable and that your pet will eat it. Most pets do. Some need a little bit more coaxing than others, but I'd say in terms of dogs, 90% of them plus will eventually come over. Cats tend to be a little bit more resistant to changes in their diet. But in any event, we absolutely recommend that you transition your pet onto the diet, especially if they've been eating kibble. Their gut isn't conditioned yet to be breaking down a diet consisting of either raw or cooked meat, for that matter. So we always say, as a general rule, start with maybe a quarter of our food to 3/4 of whatever you're currently feeding. Do that for a couple of days. Monitor your dog. If everything seems to be going okay, up it to 50-50. Do that for a couple of days. Take a week or 10 days to transition your pet onto it. If you've got an older pet or somebody with one with a sensitive stomach, take a little bit longer. With cats, take a little bit longer. But if you do that, you should be fine. It goes pretty easy. We even do recommend sometimes with older dogs, perhaps, and I'm doing this now with our foster because she's 10 years old. Cook the food lightly at first. There's nothing wrong with that. Just to help them during that transition, and then every day cook it a little bit less, until you get to the point where they're eating it raw.
Well, Gary, we want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. And for our listeners that want to get in touch with you or learn more about your company, that information one more time.
Sure, it's Darwin's Pet, Darwin's with an S, darwinspet.com. And well, I will say we just launched a brand new website. We're very excited about it. So we'd love for you to visit and check it out and let us know how you like it and if we can be of any help to you.
You bet. Well, thank you so much. So our next show from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio will be a very special episode, as it will be our 100th episode of the Seattle Shrimp Tank. So join us next Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, as we look back at the last year of the podcast. Make sure to check out all of the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, as well as on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And remember, to become a shark, we all start out as shrimps.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond, and the